I'm Lieutenant Commander Sophia Mercer, 33, Naval Intelligence. I built my career on precision, reading patterns, predicting threats, keeping pilots alive. For years, I followed every rule, every protocol, every lesson my father drilled into me about discipline and duty. But at my comrade's funeral, when my own father whispered that my incompetence probably killed him, something in me broke, and I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been blamed or humiliated by someone you spent your life trying to make proud? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand your ground when everyone else doubted you, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about loyalty, courage, and reclaiming your worth. What happened next might surprise you. I stood at attention in the chapel at Naval Air Station Pensacola, my dress whites crisp against the humid Florida air, and watched my father across the aisle. Captain William Mercer sat with his back rigid, his service ribbons a neat rainbow against navy blue, his eyes fixed straight ahead like he was still on a bridge somewhere commanding respect. He didn't look at me. He rarely did. Not unless there was something to correct. I was 33 years old, a lieutenant commander in naval intelligence, and I still felt like that 10-year-old girl trying to fold a flag properly while he timed me with his watch. My mother had wanted me to be a teacher. She died when I was 12, and I think part of me joined the Navy just to keep her memory from fading completely under his expectations. He never said he was proud when I graduated top of my class from the Naval Academy. He said, expected. When I received my commission, he nodded once and told me the real work was just beginning. When I made lieutenant commander at 31, 2 years ahead of the average timeline, he asked why I hadn't pursued a command track instead of intelligence. That's how it had always been. Every achievement was a baseline, never a summit. The chaplain's voice droned on about service and sacrifice, but I wasn't listening. I was thinking about Ethan Vale, whose body wasn't even here yet. Lieutenant Ethan Vale, call sign Compass, 03, 29 years old, pilot in Strike Fighter Squadron 147. We'd met at flight school. I was there for intelligence training while he learned to fly F divided by a -18s. We became friends over terrible coffee in the ready room, bonded by mutual respect and the kind of unspoken loyalty you only find in people who understand what it means to put the mission first. He used to joke that I saw things before they happened. Mercer's got radar for a brain, he'd say, tapping his temple. She'll keep us alive when everyone else is guessing. Except I hadn't kept him alive. It happened during a joint exercise 3 months ago. We were operating in the South China Sea, and I'd been analyzing enemy radar patterns for 2 weeks straight. Something felt wrong. The coastal defense systems were moving in irregular patterns, repositioning faster than doctrine suggested. I flagged it in my report and recommended tactical withdrawal for the reconnaissance squadron, Ethan's squadron. The briefing room had been crowded. My father was there as part of the operational oversight team, sitting in the back with his arms crossed. I'd presented my findings clearly, without emotion, exactly as he'd taught me. Precision over feeling. Facts over fear. The mission commander, a captain I'd never worked with before, dismissed my concerns. Intelligence indicates normal defensive posturing, he said. We proceed as planned. I'd glanced back at my father. He was looking at his tablet, his face unreadable. I waited for him to speak up, to add weight to my assessment. He'd been in the Navy for 28 years. He understood tactical intelligence. He knew I didn't make recommendations lightly. He said nothing. Ethan's aircraft went down 16 hours later. The recovery teams found wreckage scattered across a rocky hillside in hostile territory, but no body. The black box data was corrupted. The official report cited enemy fire during reconnaissance operations and left it at that. My father called me into his office the next day. Not as my father, as Captain Mercer, senior officer. You hesitated, he said, standing by the window with his back to me. You presented your analysis, but you didn't fight for it. In this business, hesitation costs lives. I wanted to tell him that I'd done everything by the book, that I'd followed protocol, that command decisions weren't mine to make. Instead, I said, yes, sir. Your friend is dead because someone in that chain didn't do their job well enough. He finally turned to face me, and his eyes were cold. Figure out if that someone was you. Within 2 weeks, the rumors started. Whispers in the passageways, conversations that stopped when I entered the ready room. People said my intelligence had been incomplete, that I'd missed something critical, that my failure to push harder had cost the squadron a pilot. My peers grew distant. Officers I'd worked with for years suddenly had excuses when I suggested grabbing lunch. I kept quiet because I was bound by classification. The mission details were sealed under command authority, and there were aspects of my analysis I couldn't discuss outside of cleared channels. I couldn't defend myself without violating my security oath, so I said nothing and let them think what they wanted. The investigation lasted 8 weeks. I answered questions in sterile conference rooms, walked through my analysis methodology a dozen times, submitted to reviews of my entire service record. The lead investigator was thorough but not unkind. He told me these things took time, that the truth would come out. I wasn't sure I believed him. My father, and I stopped speaking outside of official business. When we passed each other on base, we exchanged salutes and nothing more. He never asked how I was holding up. He never acknowledged that his silence in that briefing room might have made a difference. At night, I'd lie in my quarters and replay the mission over and over. I'd done everything right. I'd identified the threat, assessed the risk, made my recommendation through proper channels. But Ethan was still dead, and I was still the one people blamed. Lieutenant Sarah Lynn, one of my junior analysts, tried to reassure me once. She was 26, fresh from training, and still believed the system worked the way they taught it in school. "They'll clear you, ma'am," she said. "Everyone knows you're good at what you do." I appreciated the sentiment, but I knew better. In the military, perception often mattered more than truth. Even if the investigation cleared me, the shadow would remain. Some people would always wonder if I'd missed something, if I'd been too cautious, if I'd let my personal connection to Ethan cloud my judgment. The irony was that my father had spent my entire life teaching me to divorce emotion from duty. "Feelings don't fly aircraft," he used to say. "Feelings don't win wars. Discipline and precision win wars." I'd learned that lesson too well. I'd been so precise, so disciplined, so determined to follow protocol exactly that I hadn't raised hell when my analysis was dismissed. And now Ethan was dead, and my father thought it was my fault. The chaplain finished his sermon and sat down. The chapel was quiet except for the soft whir of the air conditioning and the distant sound of aircraft on the flight line. I stared at the empty space where a casket should have been and felt the weight of every choice I'd made, every word I hadn't said. 6 weeks after the initial investigation began, the recovery team finally located Ethan's remains. They brought him home in a flag-draped casket, and the Navy scheduled a funeral with full honors. I received the notification via official email, my name included on the list of personnel expected to attend. I didn't know if I could face it. But I knew I had to. The funeral was held on a gray morning in late September. The sky over Naval Air Station Pensacola hung low and heavy, threatening rain but never quite delivering. I drove to the base chapel in my personal vehicle, my dress uniform already on, my insignia polished to a mirror shine. The parking lot was full. Ethan had been well-liked, the kind of pilot who bought rounds for his squadron and remembered birthdays. I found a spot in the back and sat in my car for 10 minutes, watching people file into the chapel. Officers in service dress, enlisted personnel in their blues, civilians in dark suits. Ethan's parents arrived in a black sedan, his mother leaning heavily on his father's arm. I'd met them twice before at squadron events. They'd been warm and welcoming, treating me like family because Ethan had told them we were close. I wondered if they blamed me too. When I finally walked into the chapel, most of the seats were taken. I spotted my father near the front, sitting with other senior officers. He glanced back as I entered, his expression unreadable, then turned away. I found a seat in the middle section, next to Lieutenant Lynn and a few other members of my intelligence unit. The service was standard military protocol. The chaplain, Commander Reyes, spoke about sacrifice and duty. Ethan's squadron commander delivered a eulogy, talking about his skill as a pilot and his dedication to the mission. Someone read a passage from scripture. A soloist sang Amazing Grace. I kept my composure through all of it. I'd learned from my father how to maintain bearing under pressure, how to lock emotions away where they couldn't interfere with duty. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, my spine straight, my eyes forward. Then came the flag ceremony. The honor guard moved with practiced precision, lifting the flag from Ethan's casket and folding it into a tight triangle. Each movement was exact, reverential. I watched the flag pass from hand to hand, white gloves against red and blue fabric, and something cracked inside my chest. My father chose that moment to lean toward me. The seat next to me had remained empty, and he'd moved down the row during the ceremony. His voice was barely a whisper, meant only for me, low enough that Commander Reyes at the podium wouldn't hear. Your incompetence probably killed him. The words hit like a physical blow. I felt my breath catch, felt heat flood my face. I didn't turn to look at him. I couldn't. If I looked at him, I would break, and I couldn't break here, not in front of Ethan's parents, not in front of my peers, not with the whole base watching. I kept my eyes on the flag. Watched it fold once more, twice more. Watched the honor guard captain cradle it like something precious and irreplaceable. My father shifted back to his original seat, his message delivered. I felt something fundamental shift inside me. Not anger. Anger would have been easier. This was colder than anger, more final. This was the moment I stopped trying to earn his approval and started wondering if I'd ever really known him at all. The honor guard captain approached Ethan's mother and knelt, presenting the flag. She took it with trembling hands, pressed it to her chest. Her husband wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Commander Reyes returned to the podium to deliver closing remarks. He spoke about Ethan's service, his sacrifice, the hole his absence would leave. Standard words, carefully chosen to comfort without promising false meaning to senseless loss. Then he paused. Admiral Knox stood up from his seat in the front row. Vice Admiral Thomas Knox, 08, Fleet Forces Command, 58 years old, with gray hair and a chest full of ribbons that included 2 silver stars and a distinguished flying cross. He was the kind of officer whose presence commanded immediate silence. He stepped toward the podium, and Commander Reyes yielded without question. Admiral Knox didn't look at his notes. He looked directly at the crowd, his gaze sweeping across the assembled personnel. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the chapel. Before we conclude, he said, I need to address something that's been weighing on me. The room went absolutely still. There have been rumors circulating about the mission that cost us Lieutenant Vale, Knox continued. Rumors about intelligence failures, about analysis that should have been stronger, about officers who didn't do their jobs properly. I felt every muscle in my body tense. Lieutenant Lynn glanced at me, her eyes wide. Around the chapel, people shifted in their seats. Admiral Knox turned slightly, his gaze finding my father in the third row. Captain Mercer, he said, his tone respectful but firm. With all due respect, sir, those rumors are not only unfounded, they're an insult to the officer who saved this mission from being a complete disaster. My father's face remained impassive, but I saw his jaw tighten. Knox turned back to the crowd. Lieutenant Commander Sophia Mercer's intelligence analysis was accurate, thorough, and delivered through proper channels with a clear recommendation for tactical adjustment. Her assessment was overridden by operational command. That was not her failure. That was ours. The chapel was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Furthermore, Knox continued, Commander Mercer's subsequent actions are the only reason we have Lieutenant Vale's remains to mourn today. He turned fully toward me now, and I felt the weight of every eye in the room follow his gaze. After the crash, when official recovery efforts were suspended due to hostile territory restrictions, Commander Mercer conducted unauthorized field analysis using available intelligence assets. She identified a narrow window for extraction and provided tactical coordinates to the Special Operations Recovery Team. That team operated outside standard protocols, at significant risk, based on her guidance. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against my thighs. She violated standing orders, Admiral Knox said. She exceeded her authority. She put her career at risk. And, because of her actions, Ethan Vale came home. His parents have a grave to visit. His squadron has closure. That's not incompetence. That's courage. He let the words hang in the air for a long moment, then he turned back toward my father. Sir, your daughter is the only reason we have a body to mourn. I suggest we remember that. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that rippled through the chapel like a wave. Officers glanced at each other. Enlisted personnel leaned forward. Ethan's mother looked up from the flag in her lap, her tear-stained face confused, but somehow lighter. My father sat frozen, his face drained of color. He looked like he'd been struck. Admiral Knox returned to his seat. Commander Reyes stepped back to the podium, fumbled for his place in the service program, and concluded the ceremony with a final prayer. I barely heard it. My mind was reeling, trying to process what had just happened. Knox had publicly commended me at a funeral, in front of senior officers, in front of my father. He'd revealed classified information, or at least the broad strokes of it, to make a point. He defended me when no one else would. The ceremony ended. The honor guard lifted Ethan's casket and carried it out to the waiting hearse. People began to stand, moving slowly toward the exits. I stayed in my seat, my legs unsteady, my thoughts scattered. Lieutenant Lin touched my arm gently. Ma'am, are you okay? I nodded, not trusting my voice. My father was already gone, disappeared into the crowd of officers filing out. I hadn't seen him leave. The reception was held in the Base Officers Club, a low building overlooking the flight line. People gathered in small clusters, speaking in hushed tones, balancing plates of food they mostly didn't eat. I stood near the windows, watching aircraft taxi in the distance, trying to process everything. Officers I hadn't spoken to in weeks suddenly found reasons to approach me. A lieutenant commander from Ethan's squadron shook my hand and thanked me for bringing him home. A captain I barely knew told me he'd always thought the rumors were garbage. Lieutenant Lin stayed close, running interference when conversations got too intense. I accepted their words with polite nods, but I felt disconnected from it all, like I was watching the scene from somewhere outside my body. Admiral Knox found me near the end of the reception. He approached without fanfare, carrying a glass of water, and stood beside me at the window. That was a hell of a thing you did, he said quietly. The recovery operation. I broke protocol, sir. You did. He took a sip of water. But you honored something more important than protocol. You honored the code. I turned to look at him. The code, sir. Leave no one behind. Knox's expression was serious. That's not just a motto. It's a promise. You kept that promise when everyone else was ready to write Lieutenant Vale off as a combat loss. You put your career on the line to bring a friend home. I felt my throat tighten. I didn't think about my career, sir. I just couldn't leave him there. I know. Knox set his glass down on the windowsill. That's what makes you a good officer. Too many people forget that rules exist to serve the mission, not the other way around. You understood that distinction. Admiral, I violated direct orders. And if you hadn't, Ethan Vale would still be in enemy territory, and his parents would spend the rest of their lives wondering where their son was buried. Knox met my eyes. Sometimes the right choice and the authorized choice aren't the same thing. The trick is knowing when to break the rules and being willing to accept the consequences. I thought about my father's words in the chapel. Your incompetence probably killed him. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to be the perfect officer, following every regulation, never stepping out of line. Sir, Captain Mercer is a good officer with a blind spot, Knox interrupted. He's spent so long following the book that he's forgotten why the book exists. You haven't. Don't lose that. He picked up his glass and started to walk away, then paused. The inquiry cleared you of all fault this morning, he said. It'll be official by tomorrow. I've also submitted a recommendation for your promotion to commander, citing extraordinary courage under restriction. The board will review it next quarter. I stared at him. Sir, don't thank me. You earned it. He glanced around the room. Your father requested a transfer this afternoon. Cited conflict of command interest. The paperwork will process within the month. Something cold settled in my stomach. Where is he going? Naval Station Norfolk. Fleet Logistics Oversight. Knox's expression softened slightly. It's a good posting. Prestigious. But it's also 3,000 miles away. I understood. My father was running, putting distance between himself and the embarrassment of this afternoon's revelation, between himself and me. I see, I said quietly. Sophia, Knox said, using my first name for the first time. You don't owe him an explanation, and you sure as hell don't owe him an apology. You did your job. He didn't do his. That's on him. He walked away, leaving me alone by the window. I stayed for another 20 minutes, made polite conversation with a few more officers, then slipped out quietly. The sun was setting as I drove back to my quarters, painting the sky orange and purple above the Gulf. I kept thinking about my father's face when Admiral Knox had spoken. The shock, the shame, the way all the color had drained from his features. Part of me felt satisfaction, vindication after months of carrying blame that wasn't mine, but mostly I just felt tired. I'd spent my entire life chasing his approval, measuring my worth by his impossible standards, believing that if I just worked hard enough, flew straight enough, followed the rules closely enough, he'd finally be proud. Admiral Knox had given me something my father never had, recognition that doing the right thing sometimes meant breaking the rules. That courage and duty weren't always the same as obedience. For the first time in my life, I wondered if my father's approval was something I'd ever really wanted, or just something I'd been conditioned to chase. That night, I sat in my quarters and pulled out the classified file on Ethan's recovery mission. I'd requested a copy for my personal records, a privilege granted to officers involved in operational decisions. The report was thorough, coordinates I'd calculated, the extraction window I'd identified, the risks the special operations team had accepted based on my analysis. At the bottom of the file was a data transfer from Ethan's recovered aircraft. The black box had been corrupted, but they'd managed to pull some files from auxiliary storage. Most of it was routine flight logs, system diagnostics, routine communications, but there was one personal recording, made 3 minutes before the crash. I almost didn't listen to it. But I needed to hear his voice one more time. Hey, Mercer. Ethan's voice came through my computer speakers, slightly distorted but unmistakably him. If you're hearing this, things went sideways. I know you flagged this mission as risky, and I know Command overrode you. That's not on you. You did your job. You always do. There was a pause, filled with the sound of his aircraft's engines and the beep of warning systems. You've got this thing you do, he continued. You see problems before they happen. You watch the radar when everyone else is looking away. It's kept us alive more times than I can count. So if I didn't make it back, I need you to know you did everything right. Don't let anyone tell you different. Another pause. His breathing was steady despite the situation. And hey, if they screw this up and don't recover me, I know you'll fix it. You're too stubborn not to. Just promise me you won't let it cost you who you are. The Navy needs more officers like you, not fewer. Compass out. The recording ended. I sat in the silence of my quarters for a long time, staring at the audio file on my screen. Ethan had known. He'd known exactly what would happen, the blame, the rumors, the doubt. And he'd tried to protect me from it even as his aircraft was going down. I closed the file and archived it. Some things, I decided, were too important to delete. But they were also too personal to keep reviewing. Ethan had been right about one thing. I was too stubborn not to fix things. I'd brought him home. I'd violated orders and risked my career and fought through months of investigation and accusation, because leaving him behind wasn't something I could live with. My father had called it incompetence. Admiral Knox had called it courage. I called it keeping a promise. The next morning, I reported to my office at 0600, same as always. Lieutenant Lin was already there, reviewing overnight intelligence reports. Morning, ma'am, she said, looking up. Congratulations on the investigation results. Thanks, Sarah. She hesitated. I heard about your father's transfer request. News travels fast. Are you okay? I considered the question. Was I okay? My closest friend was dead. My father couldn't stand to work on the same base as me. I'd spent 3 months under investigation, isolated from my peers, carrying classified secrets that could have cleared my name but couldn't be spoken, but I was still here. Still standing. Still serving. I'm okay, I said, and meant it. The weeks that followed were strange. The official inquiry results hit my record exactly as Admiral Knox had promised, cleared of all fault, commended for initiative in the recovery operation. The promotion recommendation went to the board. Officers who'd avoided me for months suddenly wanted to work with me again. My father's transfer processed quickly, unusually so. Within 3 weeks, he was gone, packed up his office, submitted his final reports, drove off base without saying goodbye. He didn't call. He didn't send a message. He just left, like our entire relationship could be dissolved with a simple change of duty station. I signed off on his transfer paperwork when it crossed my desk. My signature was required as the officer who'd been under investigation, a formality to confirm there were no outstanding issues preventing his reassignment. I wrote my name clearly, dated it, and forwarded it up the chain without hesitation. For the first time in my life, I didn't chase his acknowledgement. He'd taught me accountability. He drilled into me the importance of owning your decisions, accepting responsibility, maintaining standards. He just hadn't expected those lessons to apply to him. 2 days before he left, he came to my office. I was surprised when he knocked. We hadn't spoken privately since the funeral. Lieutenant Lin excused herself quickly, sensing the tension. My father stood in the doorway in his service khakis, his posture military perfect, his expression carefully neutral. "Commander Mercer," he said formally. "Captain." I didn't stand. Technically, I should have, but something in me refused. He stepped inside and closed the door. For a moment, he just stood there, looking around my office like he'd never seen it before. The maps on the walls, the intelligence summaries on my desk, the commendation letters filed neatly in frames. "I wanted to explain," he started. "There's nothing to explain, sir." "Sophia, Captain Mercer," I corrected, keeping my voice level. "If this is an official conversation, let's keep it official." His jaw tightened. "The briefing. When you presented your analysis. I should have backed you up." "Yes, you should have. The mission commander outranked me operationally. It wasn't my call. You had influence. You have 28 years of service and a reputation that carries weight. One word from you, and he would have reconsidered." I met his eyes steadily. "You taught me that leadership isn't about rank. It's about taking responsibility when responsibility matters. You didn't do that." He was silent for a long moment. "At the funeral," he said quietly, "what I said was out of line. It was more than out of line. It was cruel. I was angry. At me? For doing my job? For trying to save my friend." I felt my composure crack slightly. I spent 3 months under investigation. 3 months being blamed for Ethan's death because command overrode my analysis. You knew the truth. You were in that briefing. You saw what happened. And instead of defending me, you blamed me. I thought. He stopped, struggling with words. "I thought if you'd pushed harder." I pushed exactly as hard as protocol allowed. You taught me to follow protocol. You taught me to respect the chain of command. You taught me not to let emotion override duty. My voice was steady, now cold. I did everything you trained me to do, and it wasn't enough. Not for you. It's never enough for you. That's not fair. Fair. I stood up then, my hands flat on the desk. You know what's not fair? Ethan Vale dying because command ignored solid intelligence. Me being blamed for it while you stayed silent. You whispering accusations at his funeral, in front of everyone who matters. And now you're transferring across the country because you can't handle the fact that Admiral Knox told the truth. His face paled. "I'm transferring because you're embarrassed," I interrupted. "Because every officer on this base now knows you sat quietly while your daughter's analysis was dismissed and then blamed her for the consequences. You taught me accountability, Captain. I accepted mine. I suggest you do the same." The words hung between us, final and irrevocable. My father stood very still. I could see him processing, see the conflict in his expression, anger and shame and something that might have been regret, all battling for dominance. Finally, he nodded once. Sharp, military. "You're right," he said quietly. "I should have backed you up. I should have defended you. I didn't, and that's on me." It wasn't an apology. Not quite. But it was the closest he'd ever come. "Noted," I said. He turned to leave, then paused with his hand on the door. "For what it's worth, You're a better officer than I ever was. You lead with conscience. I just wish I'd seen it sooner. Then he was gone. I sat back down at my desk and stared at the closed door for a long time. Lieutenant Lin knocked softly and peeked in. Ma'am? Are you all right? I'm fine, Sarah. Come on in. We got back to work. The promotion board met in January. I was stationed at Air Intelligence Command Pacific by then, transferred 3 months after my father left Pensacola. The new posting came with increased responsibility. I was supervising a team of 12 analysts, coordinating intelligence for carrier strike groups operating across the Pacific Theater. The work was demanding but satisfying. I was good at it, and for the first time in my career, I felt like people recognized that without qualification or asterisk, the board results came through on a Friday afternoon. Lieutenant Lin, who'd transferred with me, brought the notification to my office with a grin. Congratulations, Commander Mercer. I looked at the official letter. Promotion to O5, effective immediately. Citation for extraordinary courage under operational restriction and exemplary leadership in crisis conditions. Thank you, Sarah. This is huge, ma'am. You made O5 before you're 35. That's ahead of timeline. Barely. Still counts. She hesitated. Are you going to tell your father? I thought about that. The last time we'd spoken had been in my office at Pensacola, 3 months ago. Since then, nothing. No calls, no emails, no acknowledgement of my transfer or my work. He was across the country, managing logistics in Norfolk, living whatever life he'd built for himself there. Maybe eventually, I said. Right now, I have work to do. The promotion ceremony was small, held in the command briefing room with my intelligence unit and a few senior officers present. Admiral Knox flew in from Fleet Forces Command specifically for the occasion, something he didn't have to do, but did anyway. He pinned the new insignia on my collar himself. Well done, Commander, he said. The Navy needs more officers willing to break the rules for the right reasons. Thank you, sir. For everything. Just don't make me regret defending you by doing something stupid. I'll do my best, sir. Afterward, there was a small reception. My team had arranged it, complete with a cake that read "Fair Winds, Commander Mercer" in blue icing. It was thoughtful and personal and exactly the kind of thing my father would have called unnecessary sentiment. I cut the cake and made a short speech thanking everyone for their support. I didn't mention Ethan directly, but I talked about the importance of bringing people home, of honoring promises, of understanding that the mission wasn't just about objectives, but about the people who carried them out. My team understood. Several of them had served under me during the investigation, had watched me weather the accusations without breaking. They knew what I meant. That night, alone in my quarters, I thought about writing to my father. Telling him about the promotion, maybe inviting him to visit. But every time I tried to draft the message, I couldn't find the right words. What would I even say? I made O5, no thanks to you? Remember when you said I was incompetent? The Navy disagrees. It all sounded petty. And I didn't want to be petty. I just wanted to stop feeling like I owed him something. So I didn't write. I focused on my work instead. Over the next year, I threw myself into building my team at Air Intelligence Command Pacific. I trained junior officers in analysis methodology, taught them to trust their instincts while respecting protocol, showed them how to present findings clearly even when command didn't want to hear them. I was careful to create an environment where people felt safe raising concerns. If someone flagged a potential threat, I listened. If their analysis was solid, I backed them up, even when it meant challenging senior officers. I became the kind of leader I'd needed during that briefing. 3 years ago. My team responded. They were sharp, dedicated, willing to work long hours because they knew I'd support them. Lieutenant Lin made lieutenant full rank and became my deputy. A young ensign named Marcus Chin showed exceptional talent in pattern recognition and reminded me a little of Ethan. I watched them grow and felt something I hadn't felt in years, pride that wasn't conditional. Satisfaction that didn't require external validation. Admiral Knox checked in periodically, usually through official channels, but sometimes by a personal message. He asked about my team's work, offered advice on navigating command politics, reminded me that breaking rules responsibly required knowing which rules mattered most. He never mentioned my father, and I was grateful for that. But my father's shadow still lingered. Every time I made a decision that bent protocol, I heard his voice in my head, precision over emotion, facts over fear. Follow the book. Every time I defended one of my analysts against pushback from senior officers, I wondered if he'd call it insubordination or courage. I still didn't know which one I was. 18 months after my promotion, I received an unexpected package. It arrived through official Navy mail, forwarded from my old address at Pensacola. The return address was Norfolk. Inside was a letter and a small wooden box. The letter was handwritten, my father's precise script filling 2 pages of official Navy stationery. Sophia. I've started this letter a dozen times over the past year and never found the right words. I'm not sure I've found them now, but I'm running out of time to try. I'm retiring in 3 months. 29 years, 8 months of service. They offered me a position at the Pentagon, but I declined. I think it's time to step back and figure out who I am when I'm not Captain Mercer. I heard about your promotion to commander. Congratulations. I know you earned it, and I know it was in spite of me rather than because of me. The box contains something I should have given you years ago. It belonged to your mother. She wanted you to have it when you made 05. I kept it because I didn't think you'd want anything from me, but I realize now that this isn't about me. It's about her. I'm not good at this. Apologies, emotional honesty, being a father instead of a commanding officer. I spent your whole life trying to make you into the perfect sailor, and I forgot that the point was to make you into yourself. You are a better officer than I ever was. You lead with conscience and courage. You understand that rules exist to serve people, not the other way around. I taught you discipline, but you learned wisdom somewhere else. Probably from your mother. Possibly from Ethan. I was wrong about a lot of things. I was wrong to stay silent in that briefing. I was wrong to blame you at the funeral. I was wrong to let my pride matter more than your truth. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not sure I deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I'm proud of the officer you became, even if I did everything possible to prevent you from becoming her. You're going to do great things, Sophia. You already have. Respectfully. Dottie set the letter down carefully and opened the wooden box. Inside was my mother's Naval Academy ring. She'd graduated in 1985. One of the early women to attend after the academy began admitting women in 1976. The ring was simple, elegant, worn smooth by years of wear. I remembered seeing it on her hand when I was young, remembered asking her what the Latin inscription meant. Ex scientia tridens. From knowledge, see power. She'd told me it meant that understanding was the foundation of strength, that knowing things deeply made you powerful in ways that force alone could never achieve. I slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for me. I read my father's letter 3 more times that night, searching for something between the lines: resentment, obligation, manipulation. But all I found was regret and a kind of exhausted honesty. He'd done terrible things. He'd failed me when I needed him most, but he'd also finally acknowledged it. Not with excuses or justifications, just with simple, painful truth. I thought about responding. Thought about calling him, writing back, finding some way to bridge the 18 months of silence. But I wasn't sure what I'd say, or if I was ready to say it. I put the letter in my desk drawer next to the file on Ethan's recovery mission, and I wore my mother's ring every day. 3 months later, I received an invitation to my father's retirement ceremony at Naval Station Norfolk. It was formal, printed on heavy cardstock, addressed to Commander Sophia Mercer. At the bottom, written in his handwriting, no obligation. I understand if you can't make it. I debated for 2 weeks. Lieutenant Lin thought I should go. He's trying, ma'am. That counts for something. Does it? I don't know. But you'll regret it if you don't find out. She was probably right. I requested leave and flew to Norfolk on a Friday in June. The ceremony was held in the base chapel, the same chapel where every major military ritual played out. I arrived early and sat in the back, watching people filter in. Officers my father had served with, enlisted personnel he'd commanded, Navy officials representing various commands. He spotted me as he entered, did a double take that was almost comical, then nodded once. I nodded back. The ceremony was standard: speeches about his service record, presentation of awards, the reading of his orders. A captain from Fleet Logistics talked about his dedication to excellence. A Rear Admiral praised his attention to detail. No one mentioned his failures. That wasn't what retirement ceremonies were for. When it was over, there was a reception at the officers' club. I stood near the buffet table with a glass of water, watching my father work the room. He was good at this, the social performance, the confident handshakes, the ability to make small talk feel meaningful. He made his way to me eventually, when the crowd had thinned. "You came," he said. "You invited me. I didn't think you would." We stood awkwardly for a moment, two officers who used to know how to talk to each other and had forgotten the language. "Your mother's ring," he said finally, nodding at my hand. "It suits you. Thank you for sending it. I should have given it to you years ago. She made me promise." He glanced around the room, then back at me. "Can we talk? Somewhere private." I followed him to an empty conference room down the hall. He closed the door and we stood facing each other across a government-issue table. "I read your letter," I said. "Multiple times. And I don't know what to do with it. With any of this." I crossed my arms. "You hurt me. For years. And then when I needed you most, you made it worse." "I know. Knowing isn't enough." "What would be enough?" He wasn't defensive, just genuinely asking. I thought about that. What would be enough? An apology? He'd offered one, sort of. An explanation? He'd given that too. A promise to do better. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe nothing. Maybe the damage is done and we just live with it." He nodded slowly. "That's fair. But I'm here," I continued. "I flew across the country for your retirement. So maybe I'm trying to figure out if there's something left worth saving. Is there? I don't know that either." We stood in silence for a while. Through the window, I could see aircraft on the distant flight line, could hear the muted sounds of the reception continuing without us. "I was a terrible father," he said finally. "I loved you, but I didn't know how to show it except through expectations and standards. I thought if I pushed you hard enough, you'd be strong enough to handle anything. I didn't realize I was just making you feel like you were never enough. I spent my whole life trying to earn your approval." "I know. And I took advantage of that. I let you keep chasing something I should have just given you freely." He met my eyes. "You were always enough, Sophia. More than enough." I was just too blind to see it. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. "I can't promise I'll ever be the father you deserved," he continued. "But I'd like to try being someone you can talk to without feeling like you're being evaluated. That's going to take time. I have time now. That's the whole point of retirement." I almost smiled. "What are you going to do with yourself?" "I don't know yet. Maybe teach. Maybe consult. Maybe just figure out how to be a person instead of a rank." He paused. "Maybe get to know my daughter. She's pretty busy. Commander at Air Intelligence Command Pacific. Runs a team of 12 analysts." I heard. "I also heard she's being considered for O6 in a few years if she keeps up the good work." "You're keeping tabs?" I asked Admiral Knox to keep me updated. "Unofficially." He looked almost embarrassed. "I wanted to know how you were doing, but I didn't think you'd want to hear from me." "You were probably right. But you're here now." "I am." He took a breath. "Would it be okay if I called you sometimes?" "Not often. Maybe once a month. Just to check in." I considered it. Part of me wanted to say no, to keep the distance we'd built, to protect myself from further disappointment. But another part, the part that still remembered being 10 years old and wanting his approval, wanted to say yes. "Once a month," I said carefully. "And if it feels like you're evaluating me instead of talking to me, I'm hanging up." "Fair. And I'm not promising anything. No instant reconciliation, no pretending the past didn't happen. I wouldn't ask for that." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or strategy. But all I saw was an aging officer who'd finally run out of excuses. "Okay," I said. "Once a month." He nodded, and for the first time in my life, I saw relief in his expression. We went back to the reception together. He introduced me to some of his colleagues, not as his daughter who worked in intelligence, but as Commander Mercer from Air Intelligence Command Pacific. The distinction felt important. I stayed for another hour, then caught my flight back to California. On the plane, I thought about forgiveness and whether it was something you gave all at once or earned piece by piece. I thought about my mother, who'd wanted me to have her ring when I made commander. I wondered what she'd think of all this, whether she'd tell me to give him a chance or to protect myself first. I didn't have answers. But I had my mother's ring on my finger and a tentative agreement to talk once a month, and maybe that was enough for now. My father called 4 weeks later on a Sunday evening. Sophia? It's your dad. Is this a good time? It's fine. I'm just finishing up some paperwork. Still working on Sunday nights. Some habits are hard to break. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing important, his retirement plans, my team's recent projects, the weather in California versus Virginia. It was awkward and stilted, but it was also civil. When he started to slip into officer mode, analyzing my decisions, I gently redirected him. Dad, remember our agreement? Right. Sorry. Still learning. We both are. The second call was easier. The third easier still. By the 6th month, we'd found a rhythm, short conversations about work and life, careful questions about each other's well-being, occasional shared memories of my mother. He never asked about Ethan directly. But once he mentioned reading an article about special operations recovery missions and said, "Made me think about what you did." It was brave. I should have said that sooner. I said, "Thank you," and we moved on. It wasn't perfect. Some calls were harder than others. Sometimes I felt myself getting defensive, waiting for criticism that didn't come. Sometimes he slipped into old patterns and I had to end the conversation early, but slowly, month by month, we were building something new. Not a father-daughter relationship exactly, but a mutual respect between two officers who'd hurt each other and were trying to do better. 2 years after his retirement, he flew to California to visit. I picked him up from the airport, and the drive to base was initially quiet. "You look good," he said eventually. "Command suits you." "Thanks. Retirement suits you too. You seem lighter. Turns out there's more to life than the Navy." He smiled slightly. Took me 30 years to figure that out. I showed him around the base, introduced him to my team, let him sit in on a briefing about Pacific Theater threat assessments. He asked smart questions, but didn't try to take over. Afterward, Lieutenant Lin pulled me aside. "Your dad's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone scarier. He seems proud of you. He's learning how to show it." That evening, we had dinner at a restaurant overlooking the ocean. We talked about his work with the Veterans Organization, about my upcoming evaluation for 06, about whether I'd ever consider taking a command position. "You'd be good at command," he said. "You have the intelligence background and the leadership skills. But you'd have to accept that you can't do everything yourself." "Is that advice or evaluation?" He paused, then smiled ruefully. "Advice. From someone who learned that lesson too late." Noted. We watched the sunset over the Pacific, the sky turning brilliant shades of orange and pink. "Your mother would be proud of you," he said quietly. "She always knew you'd be extraordinary. I just couldn't see past my own expectations to notice." I touched the ring on my finger. I think about her a lot. What she'd say about all this. She'd probably tell me I was an idiot for not supporting you sooner. She was good at cutting through my nonsense. He looked at me directly. "I miss her. Every day. But I'm grateful she gave me you, even if it took me decades to appreciate it." It was the most emotionally honest thing he'd ever said to me. "I'm glad you came," I said. "Me too." We didn't hug. We weren't there yet, might never be there. But we shared a salute across the table, formal, professional, but somehow human in a way our relationship had never been before. It wasn't reconciliation exactly. It was something more honest than that. It was two people who'd failed each other learning to try again, without promises of perfection or guarantees of success. 3 years after Ethan's funeral, I returned to Naval Air Station Pensacola for a memorial dedication. The base was building a new training center, and they'd named the intelligence wing after Lieutenant Ethan Vale. His parents were there for the ceremony, along with members of his old squadron and officers from various commands. I stood in the crowd as they unveiled the plaque, his name, his rank, his call sign, the dates of his service. The inscription read, "An officer who understood that courage means doing what's right, even when it's hard." Admiral Knox gave the dedication speech. He talked about Ethan's skill as a pilot, his dedication to his squadron, his friendship with his fellow officers. He talked about the importance of never leaving anyone behind, of honoring promises even when protocols say otherwise. He didn't mention me by name, but his eyes found mine in the crowd, and I understood. After the ceremony, Ethan's mother approached me. Mrs. Vale was in her early 60s, her hair mostly gray now, but her eyes were kind. "Commander Mercer," she said. "Thank you for bringing him home, Mrs. Vale." I didn't know what else to say. "Admiral Knox told us what you did. How you broke the rules to find him." She took my hands in hers. "You gave us the chance to say goodbye, to have a place to visit. That's a gift we'll never stop being grateful for. He would have done the same for me." "I know. That's the kind of person he was." She squeezed my hands gently. "He talked about you all the time. Said you were the smartest officer he knew. Said you'd change the Navy someday. I'm just trying to do my job. That's what he said you'd say." She smiled through tears. "Keep doing it. Keep being the officer he believed you were." I promised I would. That night, I stood alone at the memorial after everyone else had left. The building was modern, all glass and steel, with Ethan's name etched prominently above the entrance. Intelligence officers would walk through those doors for decades, would see his name, would maybe ask someone who he was. Some would hear the official story, pilot killed in action during a reconnaissance mission. Some might hear the whole story. The intelligence that was ignored, the officer who broke the rules to bring him home, the father who whispered accusations, and the admiral who revealed the truth. Stories had a way of evolving, of becoming simplified or dramatized over time, but the truth would remain. Ethan Vale had been a good officer and a better friend, and he died doing his job. And I'd kept my promise to bring him home, no matter the cost. I touched the plaque gently, traced the engraved letters of his name. "I think I'm doing okay, Compass," I said quietly. Still watching the radar. Still keeping promises. Still learning how to break the right rules. The wind carried my words away across the flight line. I turned and walked back to my car. Tomorrow I'd fly back to California, back to my team and my responsibilities. Back to the work of being Commander Mercer, officer in naval intelligence, leader of analysts, keeper of promises. But tonight, I let myself be just Sophia, someone who'd lost a friend, disappointed a father, violated orders, and somehow come through it all still standing. I once thought silence was weakness. That speaking up, fighting back, making noise was the only way to prove strength. But I'd learned something different in the years since Ethan's funeral. Silence wasn't weakness. It was patience. It was the space where truth waited, gathering weight and evidence until the world was finally ready to hear it. And sometimes truth needed someone to fight for it, to break rules for it, to risk everything for it. I'd done that for Ethan. I'd do it again for the next person who needed it. That was the promise I kept, not to any single person, but to the idea that service meant more than following orders. It meant understanding when orders were wrong and having the courage to do what was right anyway. My father had finally learned that lesson. It had cost him his pride and his relationship with me, but he learned it. I'd learned it sooner, learned it from Ethan's death and the investigation that followed, learned it from Admiral Knox's public defense and my own decision to bring my friend home. The lesson was simple. Rules existed to serve people, not the other way around. And the best officers were the ones who understood that distinction. I drove back to my hotel, my mother's ring solid and reassuring on my finger, and thought about the young analysts I was training. I thought about Lieutenant Lin and Ensign Chin and all the others who were learning how to be intelligence officers. I'd teach them the rules. Every single one. Protocol, procedure, chain of command, classification levels, briefing formats, all of it. But I'd also teach them when to break the rules. How to recognize the moment when following procedure would cause more harm than violating it. How to accept the consequences of their choices. How to lead with conscience instead of just competence. I'd teach them what my father had taught me, but also what he'd failed to teach me. I'd teach them to be officers who understood that sometimes courage looked like patience, sometimes it looked like silence, and sometimes it looked like breaking every rule in the book because a friend needed to come home. That was the legacy I wanted to leave, not a perfect record or an unblemished reputation, but a generation of officers who understood that doing the right thing was more important than doing the authorized thing. Ethan would have approved. My mother would have been proud, and my father slowly, awkwardly, too late, but still trying, was finally learning to be proud too. That was enough. 5 years after Ethan's funeral, I stood in another chapel. This time for a different ceremony. Captain Sophia Mercer, 06, receiving her promotion to full captain at age 39, 2 years ahead of the average timeline. Admiral Knox pinned the insignia on my collar, exactly as he'd done when I made commander. "You keep making me look smart," he said quietly. "Don't stop now." "I'll do my best, sir." My father sat in the third row, next to Lieutenant Commander Sarah Lynn and several members of my team. He was in civilian clothes, a dark suit, a navy tie, and when our eyes met, he smiled. Not the tight, controlled expression I'd grown up with, but something genuine and warm. After the ceremony, after the official photos and the reception and all the formalities, we stood together on the steps of the chapel. "Congratulations, Captain," he said. "Thank you. I'm proud of you. Genuinely, completely proud." He paused. "I should have said that decades ago. I should have said it every time you accomplished something. I should have made sure you never doubted it. You're saying it now. That counts. Does it make up for the years I didn't?" I thought about that question, really thought about it. Did his recent efforts erase the damage he'd caused? Did saying the right things now compensate for saying the wrong things then? "No," I said honestly. "But it means something anyway. Growth matters, even when it's late." He nodded, accepting the truth of that. "Your mother would have loved this day," he said. "She always knew you'd make captain. She had a whole speech planned about it, something about how you'd gotten her intelligence and my determination, and that was an unstoppable combination. I wish she could have been here. She is. In that ring. In the way you lead. In the fact that you figured out how to be both strong and kind, which is something I never managed." He looked at me seriously. "You're everything she hoped you'd be, Sophia. Everything I failed to recognize until it was almost too late. You're doing better now. I'm trying. That's all I can promise, that I'll keep trying. That's all I ask." We stood together in the afternoon sun, watching my team celebrate on the chapel lawn. Lieutenant Commander Lin was organizing photos. Ensign Chin, now Lieutenant Chin, was talking animatedly with other junior officers. Admiral Knox was sharing a story with a group of senior staff. These were my people. My team. The officers I'd trained and mentored and trusted with the same kind of loyalty Ethan had given me. "You've built something good here," my father said, following my gaze. "A team that respects you and trusts you. That's harder than making rank. You taught me discipline and precision. Admiral Knox taught me courage. Ethan taught me loyalty." I looked at him. "But I had to learn wisdom on my own." "And you did. That's what makes you a better officer than I ever was." I didn't argue with him. It was probably true. That evening, after the celebrations wound down, I walked alone across the base to the memorial dedicated to Lieutenant Ethan Vale. The building was quiet, most personnel gone for the day. I stood in front of the plaque with his name and read the inscription again. An officer who understood that courage means doing what's right, even when it's hard. "I made Captain Compass," I said to the engraved letters. "Did it your way, watching the radar, keeping promises, breaking rules when it mattered. Your parents were at the ceremony. They said to tell you they're proud of the memorial, proud of what your name represents." The building was silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of aircraft. "I think I finally figured out what you were trying to tell me in that last recording. You said not to let them change who I was. You said the Navy needed more officers like me, not fewer." I touched the plaque gently. "I'm trying to be that officer. I'm training others to be that officer. Your legacy isn't just this building, it's every analyst I teach to trust their instincts, every officer I show how to break the right rules." I stood there for another moment, then stepped back and saluted, sharp, precise, respectful. "Thank you for being my friend. Thank you for trusting my analysis even when command didn't. Thank you for that recording." My voice was steady. "I kept my promise. I brought you home. And I've kept every promise since." I turned and walked back across the base to my quarters, Inside, I found a small package waiting, no return address, just my name and rank in familiar handwriting. I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter and a photograph. The photo was old, edges slightly worn. It showed my mother in her Naval Academy uniform, young and confident, standing next to my father in his midshipman dress. They were both smiling, real smiles, not posed, and they looked happy in a way I'd never seen them in my own memories. The letter was short. "Sophia, I found this while going through old files. Your mother kept it in her desk drawer at every duty station we were assigned to." On the back, she wrote, "Remember why we do this, for each other, not just for the mission." I forgot that lesson somewhere along the way. Forgot that the mission was supposed to serve the people, not consume them. She never forgot. And somehow, despite my best efforts to turn you into a copy of me, you didn't forget either. You're the best of both of us, her wisdom and compassion, my discipline and dedication. But you made those traits your own, used them to build something neither of us could have achieved alone. I love you. I should have said that more often. I should have shown it better. I'm saying it now. He turned the photo over. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, "Remember why we do this, for each other, not just for the mission." I placed the photo on my desk, propped against my mother's academy graduation picture. Then I pulled out a piece of paper and wrote my own letter. "Dad, thank you for the photo. Thank you for trying. Thank you for finally learning the lessons Mom tried to teach both of us. I love you too. Even when it's hard. Even when it was almost too late. Even when we're still figuring out how to be family again." Sophia, I sealed the letter and set it aside to mail in the morning. Then I sat at my desk, my mother's ring on my finger, surrounded by photos of my team and my achievements and the people who'd shaped me into Captain Sophia Mercer, and I felt something I'd chased my entire life, but never quite found until now. Peace, not happiness exactly. Ethan was still gone. My relationship with my father was still complicated. The work was still demanding. And sometimes impossible, but peace. The knowledge that I'd done the right things for the right reasons. That I'd kept my promises. That I'd honored the people who mattered most, even when it cost me everything. I once thought silence was weakness. Turns out, it's where truth waits, patient and certain, until the world is finally ready to hear it. And when the world wasn't ready, when the truth needed someone to fight for it, to risk everything for it, to break every rule that stood in its way, I'd learned to be that person. That was my legacy. Not my rank or my ribbons or my perfect service record. My legacy was keeping promises, breaking the right rules, leading with conscience instead of just following orders, teaching the next generation to do the same. That was enough. That was everything. That's my story. I kept the promise, even when it cost me. Now I want to hear yours. Have you ever been blamed by family for something they didn't understand? When have you broken a rule to do the right thing, and would you do it again? If you've served, how do you set boundaries with people who outrank you at home? What does leave no one behind mean in your world, work, family, or friendship? If you could say one sentence to the person who doubted you most, what would it be? Drop your answers in the comments. If this resonated, like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs a reminder to stand their ground. And tell me where you're watching from. Your stories help others keep theirs.